Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today we're diving into innovation.
Ooh, innovation.
But not just like, those eureka moments you hear about. We're going deeper into how those great ideas become, real tangible changes.
Right. Like, how do they actually make it out into the world?
Exactly. And get this, the role governments play in it all might surprise you.
Oh, I bet governments and innovation don't always think of them together.
I know, right? But that's what makes this so interesting. To guide us, we've got some really cool academic papers.
Oh, very academic.
Well, they're actually pretty fascinating, all about these things called innovation systems and how policy shapes them.
Okay, so like the structures and strategies that help innovation happen.
Exactly. We even have a case study on this thing called the Swedish National Innovation Council.
Sweden always seems to be on the cutting edge.
They really are. And prepare to be amazed because we'll even uncover how something as simple as buying a noise barrier.
A noise barrier. What does that have to do with innovation?
Well, you'll have to wait and see. But trust me, it can be a powerful tool for driving innovation.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. Let's get into it.
All right, so first things first, we got to define what we mean by innovation system. I'm guessing that old linear model, where innovation just flows neatly from research to market.
Ah, the good old days when things were simple.
Yeah, right. So that model's out the window, right?
Pretty much. The real world is way more dynamic and way more complex.
So it's not just a straight line.
Nope, not at all. One of the leading thinkers in this field, Charles Edquist, he calls it the systems activities approach.
Systems activities approach. Okay, that sounds
A mouthful.
a little bit. So what does that even mean?
Well, basically, Edquist identifies 10 key activities that make up a real-world innovation system.
10. Wow, I was only thinking of like research patents, maybe marketing.
It's way more than that. Those are important, of course.
No.
But he also includes things like competence-building networking.
Competence building networking. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Right. And even things like the formation of new product markets. You need a space for these innovations to actually exist. And users have to articulate what they need. Like, hey, we need a product that does this.
So it's about creating the demand too, not just the supply.
Exactly. And then there's the role of government. Even the way they buy things can influence what kinds of innovations come about.
Wait, you're telling me that something as simple as a government purchase could actually drive innovation?
Absolutely. Think about it. Let's say a government needs a new noise barrier for a highway.
Okay, so like those tall concrete walls along the side of the road?
Exactly. Traditionally, they might just say, we need a concrete noise barrier 10 feet tall, end of story. But what if they describe the problem they were trying to solve instead?
So instead of saying, we need this specific thing, they'd say, we need to reduce noise pollution in this area.
Exactly. That opens up the possibilities for all sorts of creative solutions.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So companies could come in with all sorts of new ideas and technologies.
Right. Suddenly you're not just buying a product, you're stimulating innovation.
That's amazing. So that's how government purchasing plays into this whole innovation system.
It's one piece of the puzzle.
Mm.
And this brings us to that holistic approach you mentioned earlier.
Right. I remember you saying that governments need to think about all 10 of those activities, not just a few, to really encourage innovation.
Exactly. That's what Edquist advocates for. He says you can't just focus on research and development and expect the whole system to thrive.
It's like you can't just water one plant in a garden and expect the whole thing to bloom.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And this idea of a holistic approach to policy, it's a relatively new concept.
So traditionally, innovation policy was just about funding science and hoping for the best.
Pretty much. But now we're seeing a shift towards this more comprehensive, system-based view.
And that means thinking about how all these different pieces of the puzzle fit together.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that brings us to Sweden. They're a great example of a country that's really trying to put this holistic approach into practice.
Oh, yeah, the Swedish National Innovation Council. That's what we were talking about earlier.
Right,
Right.
that's the one. And get this, it was created by the Prime Minister himself.
Wow. The Prime Minister's personally involved in innovation. That's a pretty big deal.
It really shows how seriously they're taking this. And it's not just focused on science. The NIC is all about creating the right conditions for innovation across all sectors, taking those holistic ideas and trying to turn them into reality.
So what kinds of things are they doing? Like what problems are they trying to solve with this holistic approach?
Well, one example is the issue of public risk capital.
Risk capital. That's the money that gets invested in startups and other ventures that are considered high risk.
Right, exactly. And in Sweden, a lot of government money was going into risk capital. but most of it was ending up with companies that were already established.
Wait, isn't the point of risk capital to support those risky early-stage companies that have a hard time getting funding elsewhere?
Exactly. That's where the truly groundbreaking innovations often come from.
So why were they giving it to companies that were already doing well?
That's what the NIC wanted to figure out. They recognized that there was a problem. So they brought it up for discussion, commissioned some research, and the research confirmed their suspicions.
So they were right. There was a problem with how they were allocating that risk capital.
Yep. And it came down to this concept of additionality.
Additionality. Now there's another one of those words.
I know. Lots of jargon in this field. But it's an important concept. Basically, it means that the government's investment should be adding something that private investors aren't already doing.
So it's not just about adding more money. It's about adding something unique and valuable to the system.
Exactly. And in this case, the government's risk capital wasn't really adding anything new. They were basically just competing with private investors instead of supporting the companies that really needed that public funding.
Ah, so they were crowding out those early stage innovators.
Precisely. And that's a classic example of how thinking holistically can help you identify problems that you might not have even noticed otherwise.
So what did they do about it? Did they just stop investing in risk capital altogether?
Nope. They actually used this knowledge to change their strategy. They created new policies to specifically direct government risk capital towards those early stage ventures, the ones with high risk, but also high reward potential.
So they actually put their money where their mouth is and really tried to nurture those potentially game-changing innovations that might not get funding otherwise.
Exactly. It's about using public funds strategically to fill in those gaps in the system and address those systemic issues that are holding back innovation. And this brings us to our second example, functional procurement.
Ah, yes. Back to the noise barrier.
You remembered?
Of course. I'm dying to know how this functional procurement actually works in practice.
Well, remember how we talked about the government saying we need to reduce noise pollution instead of dictating a specific type of noise barrier?
Yeah, that was a great example.
Well, that's the core idea behind functional procurement. You describe the problem or the function you need instead of specifying the exact solution.
So it's like saying, here's the challenge, impress me with your solutions.
Exactly. And in the case of Sweden, the NIC recognized the potential of this approach and pushed for a national strategy that prioritized it. It's still relatively new, but if successful, Sweden could become a leader in using public purchases to drive innovation.
That's so cool. It sounds like a really powerful way to encourage companies to come up with new ideas.
It really is. And it all comes back to thinking about innovation as a system, understanding those connections and interactions between different actors and activities.
Right. It's not just about individual companies or researchers. It's about the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And that's what makes this field so fascinating. It's about understanding those complex dynamics and finding ways to create the conditions for innovation to flourish.
So the work of researchers like Edquist, it's not just some abstract academic exercise. It's actually having a real impact on the way governments are approaching innovation.
Absolutely. Having those clear concepts and frameworks in place is essential for creating effective policies.
It's like having a good map before you set out on an expedition.
I like that analogy. But this begs the question, does any of this matter to those of us who aren't Swedish policymakers?
Right. That's a really good question. It's all well and good to talk about what Sweden's doing, but is this just a Swedish thing?
Right. Or can these ideas be applied in other countries, even in our own lives?
That's where it gets really exciting, I think. The lessons from Sweden's experiment with this whole holistic innovation policy, they're relevant globally.
So no matter where you are, what kind of system you're in.
Exactly. Because every country, every region, even every organization has its own unique innovation system.
So what you're saying is even if we're not, government policymakers,
Right.
understanding these principles could be useful for anyone who wants to encourage innovation,
Absolutely.
whether it's in our communities, workplaces, even our personal projects.
It's all about understanding those dynamics, those interconnections.
Right, those things that can either help or hinder innovation.
Exactly, turning those ideas into reality. Okay, I'm starting to see how this applies beyond just, government policy.
Right.
But before we get too far ahead, I want to go back to this idea of a holistic approach.
Yeah.
It still feels a bit abstract to me.
Okay.
Can we ground this with a real-world example? Like,
Uh.
how does having this holistic mindset actually change the way policy decisions are made?
Sure. Let's go back to Sweden's risk capital policy.
Okay.
Remember how they realized they were mostly funding those late-stage companies?
Right, creating that crowding out effect.
Exactly. Essentially, they were competing with private investors instead of, supporting those companies that really needed public funding.
Right, that lack of additionality.
Exactly. Now imagine if they hadn't had that conceptual framework in place.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
they might have just kept throwing money at the problem, assuming that more risk capital would automatically lead to more innovation.
Right, without realizing they were actually making things worse for those early stage
Yeah,
companies.
exactly. Because they were crowding out those potential private investors. But because they were thinking holistically, you see,
Yeah.
they understood how all those pieces of the system fit together.
Right.
They were able to actually pinpoint the issue and create a targeted policy change.
And that's what led to the creation of Sam Invest AB.
That's right.
Okay, remind me again what that is?
So Sam Invest AB, it's a public risk capital company in Sweden, completely owned by the government.
Okay.
And it was created specifically to invest in those early stage ventures struggling to attract that private capital.
Uh-huh.
And it's a direct result of the NIC's commitment to a holistic approach.
So they didn't just identify a problem, they actually created a solution
Right.
designed to address that specific issue within the system. That's pretty impressive.
It really highlights the power of having these conceptual frameworks in place.
Yeah.
It's about having that shared understanding of how innovation actually works, which leads to more effective action.
Okay. I can see how this holistic view can help policymakers make better decisions.
Right.
But let's be real, government policy can be notoriously slow-moving.
Oh, absolutely. Bureaucratic. Even with the best intentions, can these kinds of changes actually happen quickly enough to make a difference? I mean, our world moves so fast.
It's a valid concern, for sure. And the answer is, it depends. The case of Sam Invest AB.
Yeah.
It shows that things can move quickly when there's strong political will.
So having the prime minister personally involved with the NIC probably helped.
Absolutely. Remember, he appointed someone to investigate that whole risk capital issue right after that first NIC meeting?
Right.
And within a year, the company was up and running.
Wow.
That streamlined process shows their commitment.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
But even in a country like Sweden, where there seems to be a lot of support for innovation,
Yeah,
I imagine there must have been some challenges in shifting to this more holistic approach.
of course. Anytime you try to change a system, there's going to be some resistance.
Pushback.
Yeah. And the sources actually highlight some of those challenges, even in the Sam Invest AB case.
Oh, really? Like what kind of challenges did they face? Well, even though Sam Invest AB was created with this clear mandate to focus on early stage investments, there was some concern that they might slip back into old habits.
You mean prioritizing those later stage companies?
Yeah, where the returns are more predictable, even if it means crowding out those early stage innovators.
Right,
And part of the challenge lies in striking that balance between public and private investment.
right. Because the goal is to complement, not compete with private capital.
Exactly.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
On one hand, you want to support those risky ventures that might not get funding otherwise,
Right.
but you also don't want to discourage private investors or
Yeah.
create an unfair advantage.
That's a great analogy. And the sources raise a really valid point. Will Sam Invest AB be able to achieve that additionality,
Right.
over the long term?
Right, that meaningful impact.
Exactly. It's something they'll need to monitor closely and adjust their strategies as they go.
So even with a well-designed policy, the work doesn't just stop there.
Right.
You need that constant evaluation and adaptation.
And maybe even some course correction along the way.
Exactly. And this brings us back to those shared conceptual frameworks.
Right.
Having that common understanding of terms like additionality, functional procurement, crowding out, it helps make sure everyone's working towards the same goals.
It's like having a common language for everyone to communicate clearly.
Exactly, so they can navigate the system.
And this isn't just for policymakers either.
Right.
These concepts can be applied at any level.
So whether you're running a small business, leading a research team,
Even just trying to be more innovative in your own life,
right.
these ideas can be helpful.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how to foster innovation,
Right.
but I think it's important to step back for a moment
Yeah.
and talk about why this even matters.
Right. Why should we care?
Why should we care about building these effective innovation systems? What's the big deal?
That's the core of it, isn't it? The sources highlight that innovation is the engine of progress
It's how we solve problems, create jobs, improve our quality of life.
and address some of the biggest challenges facing humanity.
Think about all the things we take for granted today
I know, right?
that were once radical innovations.
Right.
The internet, smartphones, life-saving medical treatments.
That's
None of these would exist without effective innovation systems.
precisely. And those are just the innovations we can see.
Right.
Think about all the less visible innovations that make our lives easier, safer, more efficient.
Like the innovations in logistics that get our packages delivered so quickly.
Yes. Or the innovations in renewable energy that are helping us address climate change.
Exactly. And the pace of change, it's only accelerating.
It is.
The more effectively we can innovate.
The better equipped we'll be to navigate all the complexities of the 21st century.
This isn't just some abstract academic theory.
Right.
It's about creating the future we want to live in.
I love that.
It's pretty inspiring when you think about it that way.
I agree. And it's not just about national governments either.
Right.
We all have a role to play in fostering innovation.
Whether it's in our communities' workplaces or even just our own lives.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm getting fired up. But where do we even begin? What advice would you give to someone listening to this who thinks, I want to be part of this. I want to help create a more innovative world. Where do they even start?
That's the question, isn't it?
Hmm.
I think one of the best pieces of advice is to start by understanding the systems you're a part of.
Okay.
What are those barriers to innovation in your field? What are the opportunities that are being overlooked?
So it's about putting on those systems thinking glasses and looking for those leverage points.
Yes.
Right, where a small change could have a ripple effect.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of just asking questions,
Oh, yeah.
challenging assumptions.
Right, like why are we doing things this way?
Exactly. And bringing together people from different backgrounds, different perspectives.
That cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah, innovation often happens at those intersections,
Where those different ideas collide.
It's true. Sometimes the most innovative thing you can do is just ask the right question.
Or connect with someone who has a totally different way of looking at things.
That's such a key point.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive into innovation,
Yeah. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
well, what we've explored today is just the tip of the iceberg, really. These sources we've talked about, they're a great starting point for anyone who wants to learn more.
Definitely. Lots more to discover out there.
But to leave you with something to really chew on, I think a provocation, if you will.
Okay, I like provocations.
Based on what we've learned about innovation as this interconnected system, are we missing out on those truly groundbreaking innovations?
The ones that could change the world.
Exactly. Because we're not thinking systemically enough.
What if we're so focused on optimizing the individual parts?
Right, all those separate initiatives.
Like research funding, patent laws, business incubators.
All important things.
Yeah. But what if we're missing the forest for the trees? What if the next big breakthrough isn't about a single invention,
Or a discovery.
but about rethinking the entire system?
Like a paradigm shift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What if it's about finding those unexpected connections
Those hidden synergies.
that could unlock a whole new level of possibility?
It's like that idea of the adjacent possible.
Right. All those possibilities that are just waiting to be discovered.
If we can just connect the dots in a new way.
I think there's so much untapped potential there.
You imagine if we could design innovation systems that were truly adaptable,
Resilient.
responsive to the ever-changing needs of the world.
Systems that could anticipate the future
Maybe even shape the future.
rather than just reacting to it.
Now that's a powerful thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it requires us to think differently,
To step outside those old ways of doing things.
to embrace the complexity of the innovation ecosystem.
So to our listeners out there, as you go about your day, your work, your life,
Yeah.
we challenge you to look for those systemic opportunities.
Where are those gaps, those disconnects, those places where a new connection, a new way of thinking could spark something truly transformative?
Because the future isn't something that just happens to us.
We create it collectively.
Through the choices we make and the systems we build.
And who knows, maybe the seeds of that next world-changing innovation are already out there.
Just waiting for the right conditions
The right connections.
to take root and flourish.
Thank you for joining us today on this deep dive into the world of innovation.
We hope you've learned something new.
And maybe even feel inspired to be part of creating a more innovative future.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
See you next time.